As you pass through the doors of Westminster Hall, you are walking in the footsteps of every Tudor monarch, from Henry VII to Elizabeth I, as well as the path of many of the Tudor period's most important figures. Here, the Tudor propaganda machine could work its magic in spectacular style. Everything about the building screamed power, wealth, and above all, legitimacy. It was here that Henry VIII, even if he didn't know it yet, demonstrated his potential as an enigmatic future king. It was below these carved angels that Anne Boleyn was celebrated as the new queen, Sir Thomas More was condemned, and Lord Dacre became the only person in Henry VIII's reign to be acquitted of high treason. It was also where Elizabeth and Mary would join with Anne of Cleves for one final show of Tudor unity. Our story starts with Elizabeth of York, the princess who, in 1487, stood in Westminster Hall awaiting her triumphant coronation at Westminster Abbey. Elizabeth married Henry VII at Westminster Abbey a year earlier, and she had given birth to the first Tudor heir, a son named Arthur. It's easy to imagine the scene as Elizabeth's procession nervously organised themselves for this important event. In 1494, Elizabeth's second surviving son, Prince Henry, was knighted by his father as Duke of York, aged just 3.5. According to contemporary sources, Henry rode solo on horseback through the streets of London and then through Westminster Hall, before being carried into his father's presence in the arms of Sir William Sandys. Prince Henry Tudor danced with his sister Margaret under the same hammer-beam roof as we see today, at the celebrations following his brother Arthur's marriage to Catherine of Aragon in 1501. Henry VII, Elizabeth of York, and the prince's grandmother, Lady Margaret Beaufort, were also present at the celebrations, where Henry was apparently so overcome by the joyous atmosphere that he suddenly cast off his gown and danced in his jacket. After this display and the death of his brother, Henry would return with Catherine for a banquet following their joint coronation as husband and wife in 1509. Unlike his brother, Henry had outlived his parents, but his grandmother Lady Margaret Beaufort was there to see the next generation of the Tudor dynasty celebrated as the rightful king. In 1521, Edward, Duke of Buckingham, the nephew of Elizabeth Woodville, was found guilty of treason at Westminster Hall for certain words spoken by the same Duke in Bletchley. Others tried at the Hall in various points in the Tudor period included John Fisher, Bishop of Rochester, Sir Thomas More, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, and Henry Wriothesley, Earl of Southampton. All of these men were not as fortunate as William, Lord Dacre of the North, also tried at Westminster Hall. Lord Dacre is famous for being the only person found not guilty of high treason during Henry VIII's reign. But Westminster Hall was the scene of some happier times in the Tudor reign. Of course, as always in the reign of Henry VIII, the happier times did not last long. In 1533, Henry watched from a raised platform as the freshly crowned and pregnant Queen Anne Boleyn took her place at her own coronation banquet. Just 3 years later, 10 days after Henry VIII was told of the allegations against his wife, legal proceedings against Queen Anne Boleyn started in the very place where Anne had been celebrated 3 years earlier. The Grand Jury of Middlesex appeared before John Baldwin, Chief Justice of the Common Pleas, and 6 other judges, to announce that they had found sufficient evidence that Anne was probably guilty and should be formally accused of her crimes. If all of this made Westminster Hall a difficult place for Anne's daughter Elizabeth to be, then the princess was given a lesson in pressing duty before sentiment when she returned to the hall for the coronation banquet of her sister, Mary I. Elizabeth was given pride of place at the coronation, if not out of sisterly love, then to show that the Tudor dynasty was as united and strong as ever. During the coronation banquet at Westminster Hall, Mary and Elizabeth sat at the high table together, joined by Anne of Cleves. A staggering 7,112 dishes were served during the banquet, of which 312 were offered to the Queen, and 4,900 went uneaten. The leftovers were distributed to the poor. During the meal, Derby, Norfolk, and Arundel rode about the hall on horseback, dressed in cloth of gold, and Sir Edward Dimmock, also on horseback, challenged anyone to dispute the Queen's title. The reign of the first crowned Queen of England had begun in dramatic style, in an equally magnificent building. As well as a traditional place of law and order, Westminster Hall is also where the bodies of monarchs are placed in preparation for their funerals at Westminster Abbey. After 44 years as Queen and 3 weeks of lying in state at Whitehall, Elizabeth's body was placed here, ready for her funeral in her grandfather's chapel at Westminster Abbey. And, with the passing of the last Tudor monarch, so ended the Tudor history of Westminster Hall.